Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. My name is Hannah Katz. I am the Grant and Education Manager here at Dieu Donné. Dieu Donné is the leading cultural nonprofit organization dedicated to serving emerging and established artists through the collaborative creation of contemporary art using the process of hand papermaking. Based in Brooklyn, our programming includes residencies, fellowships, and workspace opportunities for artists, workshops and educational programming for all ages, and exhibitions and publications. You can turn on closed captioning with the closed captioning button at the bottom of your screen. Please use the Q&A function to submit questions throughout the talk, and we'll come back to all of your questions at the end. Without further ado, I am honored to introduce today's guest artists, co-founders of Hanji Edition, Steph and Lars Kim. Steph is an artist working primarily with handmade paper and books as her medium. She received her MFA from the University of Iowa Center for the Book and BA from Stanford University. In 2015-2016, she studied Korean books, paper, print, and textiles through a Fulbright research grant in South Korea. Her works are held in private and public collections, including Yale University, the Metropolitan Museum of Art Library, and the Asian Art Museum. Steph is a co-founder of the Korean American Artist Collective and a co-founder of Hanji Edition, a publisher of fine art and print works on Hanji. She is a member of the Book Print Artist Scholar of Color Collective, and serves on the board of hand papermaking. Steph has taught at Mills College, Penland School of Craft, and the San Francisco Center for the Book. She lives and works out of her home studio in Sacramento, California. Lars Kim is a designer, printmaker, and educator based in Portland, Oregon. After completing studies at Bryn Mawr College and the University of Copenhagen, she worked in architecture and new media before managing creative production at Logos Graphics in San Francisco. Her print work frequently blends multiple processes, offset, letterpress, screen print, and intaglio, with Eastern, Western, and experimental forms of hand papermaking and bookbinding. Lars teaches at the San Francisco Center for the Book, where she created an artist book called Shipshangsang in 2017. She's also a member of From Jikji to Gutenberg, a UNESCO-supported transnational project which seeks to promote cultural democracy and understanding within historical printing narratives for a global audience. As an independent scholar, Lars investigates East Asian typography and the transmission of early printing techniques along the Silk Road. Her current research involves analysis of the Korean movable type collections at the Newberry Library and in the Library of Congress. So without further ado, I welcome Steph and Lars.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having us. We are huge fans of Dieu Donné and are so honored and excited to share our journey and our work with you all. Today, we're going to start by taking turns introducing ourselves, and then we'll share a bit of the origin story of how Hanji Edition started. Then we'll talk about some of our past projects, as well as our current work in progress, and then we'll end with some reflections.
So hi, everyone. I'm Lars, and we just want to share a little bit about ourselves and about our backgrounds and how they inform our current work as Hanji Edition. So to start things off, my background is actually not in paper. It's in architecture, design, and new media. And in a way, I began digitally and then went analog after I stumbled upon John Sullivan in his studio, which is Logos Graphics in San Francisco. That was back at the end of 2006. And I ended up managing Logos for the next 13 years, where I mastered technical aspects of print, which included letterpress, offset, screen printing, and intaglio, as well as Eastern, Western, and more experimental forms of papermaking and bookbinding. So big props to John there for helping me learn a lot of these amazing techniques. So in this slide, I'm on the left-hand side forming a single sheet of Hanji. It's a little wrinkly, but that was one of my very first sheets. In the middle, you see a photo of a 3-color letterpress illustration on Hanji for the artist book that I did for the San Francisco Center for the Book. And on the right, I'm screen printing tote bags for Hanji Edition during our fundraising stage. And so during my time at Logos, we often blended different print and paper processes. And it was amazing fun to find ways to bridge Eastern and Western traditions. So this is kind of a small sampling of the kind of projects that we did there. On the left is a mix of handmade papers made from both Eastern and Western fiber. In the middle is a card that I printed using ancient art found in a Chinese tomb. And I feel like I'm often inspired by the sacred arts that emerged along the Silk Road. And on the right-hand side are some paper hearts that I die cut from Eastern style paper made in the studio. So fast forward a couple of years, one night in my 30s, here I am as an adult. I went home and had dinner with my parents. And at this point in my life, I felt like I was finally just beginning to learn about their past in Korea before they immigrated to the US. And my mom ended up sharing how her family fled Seoul, which is the capital, during the Korean War in the 1950s. And her family went to this house, which is pictured here, which is a family home that's south in the countryside. It's just south of the capital. And in this house, there was a room full of wood blocks that had been in the family for generations. And sadly, sometime in the 1960s, my mom said that a thief came in the middle of the night and literally stole all of these wood blocks. And these family heirlooms were never seen again. So this story came as a revelation to me in a couple of ways. First, I realized how very little I knew about my mom's family and her past. So it was an opening into her history. And second, I didn't realize that I had a family connection to printing at all. In this case, it was woodblock printing. And it turned out that my ancestors are linked further to printing in Korea. They're tied to the very first movable metal type that was cast in the Joseon dynasty, as well as the establishment of the bureau that oversaw typecasting, printing, and paper making in Korea. And that was over 600 years ago. And so basically this one conversation made me realize how little I knew about the printing and papermaking processes of my ancestors. And I searched in vain for a graduate program to learn more. But when I realized that no such program existed in the West, I became an independent scholar. And now I'm an educator in this topic. And here are just a few images from my research journey, which still continues today. On the left-hand side is an example of Korean wooden movable type. And in the center, you can see a photo that combines Korean and Chinese movable type printed on Hanji from the 15th century, right around the time that Gutenberg published his 42-line Bible. And on the right-hand side are two images. In the background, you can see some calligraphy, which was written by my grandfather on Hanji over 80 years ago. And that Hanji is still lustrous and fresh and totally unfaded with time. On top of that photo is a picture that I took at the Newberry Library earlier this year, where I experienced a breakthrough in my research. I was able to link their Korean type collection with the one at the Library of Congress. And it turns out that neither institution knew that their collections actually shared that same provenance. And I feel like this points to the need for more research of overseas Korean collections and the translation of existing studies on historical Korean printing and papermaking into English.
Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Steph. I'm an artist and papermaker based in Sacramento. So in my practice, I make and use Hanji Korean paper, and I also teach workshops on papermaking and bookbinding. My journey was also not very linear. I first started making artist books while living in San Francisco and Oakland over 10 years ago. I had met Amy Lee, who is also a Hanji practitioner and scholar. I met her in 2010 during a period in my life when I was just getting into book arts and considering going to grad school. And she actually is the one that encouraged me to go to Iowa because I mentioned that I wanted to learn more about papermaking. And so this photo on the left is me working at Oakdale, the paper production facility at the University of Iowa Center for the Book. And Iowa instilled in me a deep appreciation for craft and tradition and gave me a foundational grounding in my understanding and approach to the book arts and papermaking. During that time, I became really interested in Korean papermaking, which my professor at the time, Tim Barrett, he had mentioned the role of Korea in the development of papermaking and books. So I decided to apply for a research grant to travel to Korea and immerse myself in all things Korean books and paper and printing. So this middle photo is me forming a sheet of Hanji in Korea. And on the right is my current Hanji making setup here in Sacramento. Part of my Fulbright research was to investigate the structure and materials of traditional Korean books, how they were made, what they were made out of, the context in which they were read and used, and how they evolved over time. So I became really interested, particularly in the process of preparing the patterned book covers, which were dyed, lined, and burnished with carved wood blocks. So those are photos on the left and on the middle that kind of show some historical book models as well as the burnishing process. I also studied at the Print Art Research Center in Seoul, and there I was able to experiment more with different printmaking methods using Hanji, and that's the photo on the right. I also had the opportunity to study at Jangjibang, which is a Hanji mill, for a month. And this was a truly formative experience that allowed me to gain a deeper understanding in all that goes into making Hanji. I'm going to play this video. This is Master Jang Sung-woo of Jangjibang forming a sheet of Hanji. And Hanji is made from the inner bark of the mulberry tree. It's an incredibly strong and versatile material with a history over 1,500 years. And Koreans developed their own unique method of sheet forming, which produces a lustrous and durable paper that was an important part of daily life. And here you see he's laying down a thread on the post and explaining to me and my mom, who's helping translate, how the paper is couched and how each sheet is 2-ply, which gives each sheet balance and strength. Okay. This is a photo of me and my teacher, his mother, who's since passed, and 3 of the ajumas, or older Korean ladies. This is on my last day at the mill. And I really respect my teacher, as he's one of the few practitioners committed to carrying on the traditional methods of Korean paper making. And when I left Korea, I wondered how I could support these traditional crafts, which are often family run and require a slower pace of life and dedication to handwork and quality materials. So when I got back to the States, I knew I wanted to find a way to keep using Hanji in my own work. And Hanji ended up being central to my art practice in many ways, and Hanji Edition is one of them.
So now we'll talk about how Hanji Edition started. And this takes us back to Logos and to John Sullivan, who's the owner of Logos Graphics. Again, I just want to give a shout out to him because John helped to provide the container in which Hanji Edition could begin and really grow. John has an enormous range of printing and paper making skills and equipment. It's just incredible to think about the sheer knowledge that he has. And again, I feel very lucky to have experienced his generosity and love over such a long period of time. But basically, because of John and Logos, Steph and I were able to produce some of the very first contemporary Hanji-related events and prints on the West Coast. And so here are 2 images of him making paper. On the left, you see him forming a sheet with a Western-style mold and decal, which he made himself. John is an excellent resource for quality and affordable molds and decals, both Eastern and Western styles. In the middle, you see a photo of him drying a sheet of Hanji. And on the right is a print that came out of logos that I feel like is a classical example of how we often combine different processes. There's screen printing, which you see in the fluorescent green ink. There's letterpress printing, which we did with black ink. And then there's gold foil stamping on a Vandercook that we did on a Vandercook that John hacked to actually take foil.
So I actually first met Lars in 2012 when I reached out to her via email and asked if I could visit Logos. And John and Lars kindly took me in and let me work on a bookbinding project. And this was before I went to Iowa and Korea. But while I was away on my travels, I kept in touch with John and Lars. And when I came back to California, they invited me to give a presentation about my time in Korea and about Hanji, and also to have a little pop-up Hanji shop at Logos as well. A couple years later, John invited me to give a Hanji workshop at Logos. And so these images kind of show the process of setting it up. I worked with a local woodworker, and John helped me put together the vat, the portable vat that we set up at Logos. And this was actually the first ever Hanji workshop in California. And it was just with a small group of people who were very, very interested in Korean paper making. I searched deep in the archives for this presentation and was able to excavate some really interesting and fun emails that kind of pinpoint where it all started. And so this is just like an example of one of the first, this is actually the first correspondence that ever mentioned the beginnings of Hanji Edition. And as it turns out, it all began when I wanted to give a presentation about printing on Hanji, kind of a continuation of the work that I'd been doing at the research center in Seoul. And I wanted to give a presentation at the AFA-DARD conference later that year in October. And so for that presentation, for that panel, I thought of doing a project where we send out Hanji to different artists and have them create a limited edition and send it back. And then we would, and then create a portfolio, a limited edition portfolio. And for me, it felt like an ideal way to create, to continue the research I'd started and to also use my book art and paper making skills towards a collaborative project. So I pitched the idea to Lars, who thankfully said yes to working on this with me and agreeing to produce this project and present in Iowa City. And on the right is just an example of some of our conversations that we would have over Google Docs. Pretty much all our meetings were on Zoom or through Google Docs or emails because we've never actually lived in the same place. And so we've always had to rely on these techniques like color coding and things like that to really make some decisions and get this project off the ground.
So as Steph mentioned earlier, we defined our project parameters for our very first portfolio. We decided it would be a print portfolio with 5 invited artists, each who would receive Hanji from Jangjibang, the mill where Steph studied in Korea, and they would produce a limited edition of 20 prints. And so we did a Kickstarter fundraiser in June to help us raise funds. And I also designed the Hanji Edition logo using a contemporary Korean or Hangul typeface. And that logo has since been used in all of our projects. And then I also designed and printed a series of small Hangul prints, which you can see on the left-hand side of the slide. And I printed those on a range of papers. The one shown here is on Hanji that Steph made in Sacramento. Other Hanji or tapes of papers that we used were naturally dyed as well. And some of these are still available for sale on our website. And I've also managed most of the printing, most of the design and printing to date. And a few images in the middle and the right-hand side show some examples of other print projects.
So after 7 months of conceiving, developing, fundraising, designing, and producing our first portfolio, we finally traveled to Iowa City to present our talk and launch our new project. And here we are at Matrices, which was the name of the conference that year. And we sat on a panel with 2 other paper makers, Catherine Delemeter and Drew Cameron. And so we're going to now talk a little bit about the actual projects that we've worked on, starting with Hanji Edition 2018, which was that same project that we had conceived and produced in 2018. So this is an image of the portfolio case, which we designed and created. And it's covered in book cloth and lined also with Hanji. And these photos were taken by one of the participating artists, Robert Cato, who's a photographer. And we had selected 5 artists with mastery in a range of printmaking processes, as well as a sensitivity to Asian papers. Each artist also offered short essays on their experience working with Hanji, and these essays were included in the portfolio. So we wanted to just show you some of the images of all of the works in this portfolio. On the left is Clarabelle Cohn's work. Clarabelle used a combination of chincolé and paint to explore abstract sea pictures using aquamarine and expressive color as the inspiration for this series. And for her contribution, each print was completely unique and featured hand-torn deckled edges. On the right is a print by Susan Balau, who is based in the Bay Area, and she created a 2-plate intaglio print using an image of a scene from San Francisco. Yoon-mi Nam, a Korean-American artist from Seoul, created a mokuhanga print using water-based inks, shown on the left. And Sarah Langworthy, who was actually my advisor at Iowa, she created her edition on a Vandercook proof press using 6 different collograph plates, acrylic gel medium, and steel wire attached to a magnet base. Finally, Robert Cato, a photographer based in the Bay Area, created a fine art digital print using a wide format inkjet printer.
Now we're going to talk a little bit about our second portfolio project. And this time we sought another round of 5 artists from around the world to work with Hanji in a wider range of applications. This includes 3-dimensional forms and natural dyes. And we feel like the result makes an excellent teaching collection that shows the possibilities of Hanji beyond print. And here we have an unboxing video of the portfolio, which features a custom enclosure with letterpress printed title slips on Hanji. First, we have a certificate of authenticity printed on Hanji. And it's followed by a hand-bound booklet with letterpress printed Hanji covers. And inside is an introductory essay by Steph and yours truly. And it also includes bios and short essays by each artist. So the first work we have is Carrie Ann Plank's polychrome woodcut. This piece is called Acaripsis and was printed on both sides of Hanji using 4 different wood blocks. And it was inspired by data visualization patterns, sound waves, and fractals. Next, we have a beautiful fold-out broadside titled Om Scripsit by Oriol Miro, who is a Barcelona-based calligrapher. And for this, Oriol made homemade red ink to write out the alphabet in Roman capitalis lettering. And surrounding it are 3 different Buddhist stanzas written in black stick ink with a metal nib. And below this is a divider piece. That takes us to the next round of 3 works. On the left-hand side, we have Radha Pandey's beautiful work. It's called Continuum. And in this piece, Radha used natural dyes from both India and Norway, which were the two countries where she had spent a lot of time in recent years, to create 2 layers of colored hanji, which she dipped in encaustic wax to create these wave-like forms. And she stitched those 2 layers together with hanji thread. And then next we have Tatiana Ginsberg's cast hanji piece called Vajra/Doorknob, which she inkjet printed and dyed with amber cork tree before casting it into this lovely, delicate, hollow shape. And that text you see in the middle is what she inkjet printed. And finally, we have Velma Bolliard's sample book, which includes hanji shufu covers, which Velma wove on a stump loom, and the interior pages are made from natural fibers and dyes. And special thanks to Rebecca Josephson for building these beautiful boxes with the help of a grant from Mills College. Thank you, Becca. And this portfolio was also produced in a limited edition of 20, just like our first portfolio, and a few copies are still available for purchase. So this portfolio was produced in 2021 during the heart of the pandemic, and several artists responded to this project by choosing spiritual themes, and they used their creative practice as a grounding force to help them during this turbulent time. For example, Tatiana's cast hanji piece plays on the Buddhist Vajra form. Vajra translates to thunderbolt in English, and its hollow interior has flecks of gold leaf, which symbolize pure, indestructible enlightenment that can be achieved through understanding and embracing emptiness. Tatiana is a familiar name in the Dieu Donné community, and we thank her so much for contributing such a beautiful piece to this portfolio.
More recently, we've been interested in collaborating with fellow Korean American artists who may not usually work with handmade paper or who have never worked with hanji. Around this time, we also started an Instagram account and producing short videos to share more about the hanji making process. So in fall of 2022, Lars and I reached out to New York-based artist and designer Pat Kim, who's shown on the left, to see if he would be interested in collaborating with us. And after initial Zoom call and some print tests on hanji, we sent Pat a stack of sheets that I had made last summer. And this video on the right was created to share with our audience how the hanji was made that Pat printed on for his edition. Pat is a woodworker and built his own vacuum frame and hand-turned woodblock, which he used to print moire patterns onto hanji. In honor of Lunar New Year that year, we released our print collaboration in a limited edition of 40, which sold out within the first couple of weeks after their release. Just a shout out to the book print Artist of Color Collective for giving us a grant that allowed us to kickstart this particular project. And we're now going to share about our current work in progress, which Lars and I have been working hard on, and we're excited. We're kind of deep in it, and we're excited to share some glimpses of the project with you all.
So yeah, as Steph mentioned, we're working on a new limited edition artist book, and the theme this time will be Ogansek, which is shown on the right. And that includes a combination of 5 traditional Korean colors, which are called obangsek, which is shown on the left. And both are derived from 5-element theory and yin-yang theory, which both come from China. And they depict the sense of interconnection and balance within the cosmos. Both draw upon the cardinal directions, they draw upon seasons and time, natural elements that are found in the universe, symbolic animals, and of course, color, which all interact with each other in a dynamic flow. And these colors are part of many aspects of Korean culture. You can see them in architecture and the arts. You find them in food and clothing as well. And as Korean Americans with blended identities of both Eastern and Western cultures, we felt drawn to this variation for our project. So we invited 5 other Korean American artists to this project as a way to deepen their personal connection to this concept and Hanji as a material. And on the right-hand side, you can see some of the initial swatch options that we offered to them. Each of the 5 participating artists were able to choose their preferred color and are now producing edition work based on their color symbols and qualities. And as a sneak peek, here we have one of the artists, Hae-Yun Song. Here's a little video of her piece, which uses robin's egg blue Hanji, which is produced by combining the colors blue and white together. And her composition is reminiscent of Korean patchwork technique called jogakbo, and it shows family photos as well as images of migration, of land, of diasporic community, and folk art in a Auchincloss process. And then next up, we have Sun Young Kang, who used violet-colored Hanji, which is made by combining red, which is traditionally represented by the southern direction in 5-element theory, and black, which represents the north, to make purple. And she chose to print the 2 animals associated with those directions. In the south, we have the red mythological bird, and in the north, we have the black tortoise. And she united those 2 animals together in purple ink.
Here we have some process pictures from the remaining 3 artists who are currently working on their editions. On the left is a sketch by Julia Chan, who is a painter and muralist based in Washington, D.C. And she's working on a woodcut print on mustard yellow Hanji. Rochelle Yuk, a multimedia artist based in the Bay Area, is planning to create a 3-color woodblock print based on the creation myth of Tangun in Korea, and her sketch is in the middle. And Bobby Cho Henderson, a Hanji artist and practitioner based in Florida, is planning to treat Hanji with persimmon juice and jumchi, a treatment that creates a textured surface, and his color is persimmon red on the right. And our plan is to release this new project, which is going to be all bound together in a book at Codex of next year. So we just want to conclude our talk with some questions and thoughts for the future, and some things that we have been thinking about now that we've worked on this project for almost 5 years now. And some of the things we have thought about are access. Our hope is to eventually make Korean book and paper arts more accessible to the general public, especially for stakeholders, people of the Korean or Asian diaspora, people with a strong interest in papermaking. This is something we're working on while also being aware of the realities of the labor and cost associated with producing these limited edition works. We also think a lot about sustainability and funding for these types of projects. This is another constant reality that we often find ourselves needing to resolve and problem solve and find creative solutions. And this is especially amidst rising costs and a struggling landscape for small publishers. We think a lot about cultural preservation, how we really want to keep this tradition alive and keep it evolving and moving forward in a contemporary context. And finally, we hope for Hanji Edition to be a source of community building, which I think is related to accessibility, but we hope to continue to think about Hanji as a vehicle for building community. So thank you all so much for listening to our presentation. And this just has our contact information along with a screenshot of our website. And we hope you visit. And now we welcome any questions that you all might have. Thank you so much.
And 4 questions. Thank you, Lars, and thank you, Steph. Amazing. Just type them into the Q&A and I can read them out loud. We have a couple great questions already in the queue. Regarding the labor and cost, how do you compensate your participating artists, and who produces the Hanji substrate for these works? So I think a really great question about funding of your project, maybe more broadly, with whatever you're comfortable announcing on the internet.
I can take that question, and Lars, you're welcome to fill in. I'll just say that we were really lucky when we did our first Kickstarter, because we had a goal, a number that we calculated that we would need to produce the initial project. And we've basically just been using that. It really did kickstart our project. And in that budget that we initially set out, we allotted money to send to each of the participating artists as stipends to cover basic things like shipping and printing inks and whatever other materials. I think the initial idea was obviously it wasn't going to be enough to fully compensate the artists for their contributions, but every artist also receives a copy of the edition. And so in some ways it felt more like an exchange or like a collaboration. Like in the end, we come out with a copy of the finished work, and hopefully a way to give people the opportunity to, we send them the paper as well and provide all the paper. Lars, do you want to take the second part of that question?
Sure. Remind me again what the second.
Who produces the Hanji substrate?
Most of the Hanji that we've used so far is from Changjibang, which is that small paper mill where Steph studied during her Fulbright. Some of the Hanji is also made by Steph in Sacramento. So it's a mix of Korean and Korean American Hanji.
And for our current project, the Hanji that we're using is colored Hanji that we mostly procured from Paper Connection, I believe, in Rhode Island.
We have another question. If you have a recommended resource to read more about 5-element theory.
Ooh. I would say I don't know of ones that are written in English. Funny enough, most of the 5-element theory material that I've read in English was published by Western-based missionaries who were in Korea right around the time that Korea opened to the West in the 1880s. And some of these early scholar missionaries were the earliest historians of Korean history, funny enough. So James Garth Gale is a great example of a missionary who wrote about this. Other Western missionaries who were in Korea at that time who wrote about Korean history at large and cultural traditions included Homer Hulbert, Appenzeller, Samuel Moffat. So if you look up the Western missionaries who were in Korea, chances are you'll find some of the historical texts or accounts that they wrote of 5-element theory, of Korean spiritual traditions, of Korean social customs, and other aspects of traditional Korean life.
There's a really great question. What is a dream you have for Korean American Hanji work in the future, even the distant future, 20, 100 years?
Ooh, that's a juicy question. Thank you for asking that one. I have a couple of thoughts, Steph. If you want to add, please do as well. I would love for Hanji to have a greater sense of I would love for the world to have a greater sense of awareness for Hanji and for other non-Western based papers. I feel like Korean paper is just one of many rich cultural traditions that come from non-Western sources. And I think the more that we're able to learn about and appreciate and use and create work from non-Western based papers, or a wider range of papers, I should say, the more that we're able to create bridges with each other, the more that we're able to deepen connection with ancestral roots, as is the case with Steph and myself. And for me, the more we're able to build richer and more diverse narratives within their artistic media. So yeah, that's my bit. Steph, I'm sure you've got a couple thoughts to share as well.
That was beautiful. I agree with everything that Lars said. And something that it's something that I've thought a lot about, especially this summer. I was able to teach a series of workshops, specifically Hanji workshops for the Korean diaspora, and it was such an amazing experience that I'm still kind of reflecting on, and thinking a lot about the potential of Hanji, as I mentioned before, the potential of Hanji as a way to build community, build bridges, and I think especially for Korean diaspora to connect in a very physical, material way back to their ancestors. And I think also connected to my work with the Korean American Artists Collective, thinking about craft traditions, material culture, things that you can physically almost mimic as a way to connect back, and then to be able to share that with others as well, I think has been such a rich practice that I feel like I've only been able to scratch the surface, but I feel like has so much rich potential.
In a related way, could you maybe share some of the reflections from the artists who participated, whom you've introduced to Hanji, or some of the responses maybe that they've given you about the medium?
I can just say from generally, I think it is really interesting. That was something that we were curious about, and we mentioned some of the criteria for how we chose artists to participate in our portfolios. And one of the things we wanted to learn was exactly that, like, what was your experience, and how was working with Hanji different from other substrates that you've used. And a lot of the artists that we've worked with, especially ones that have never worked with Hanji before, they were really surprised at its strength, its ability to hold up to whatever print process they were using. And I think too, there was always the comparison between Hanji and washi, Japanese paper. And it's interesting just to hear, especially from people who are working so intimately with the material, what their reactions to the Korean paper. And so for many of these artists, that's really has been their only experience of Korean culture, maybe, or some type of Korean material. And so yeah, it's been eye-opening to hear their responses, especially as artists. Lars?
I would add on, most of the artists that we've worked with didn't have an initial familiarity with Hanji. So part of what makes Hanji Edition so delightful for me is being able to introduce artists to a new substrate. And I think Oriol Miro, or Uri as he's called, who's that calligrapher based in Barcelona who participated in our 2021 portfolio, he actually wrote to us, and he talked about how as a calligrapher and as someone who is a practitioner of hand lettering, he loves to challenge himself by experimenting with materials that he's never worked with before. In a way, he felt like it was a wonderful delight and a surprise for his own practice to try his hand at using a material that he didn't know about. And so for him, he was really grateful for that opportunity to do some amazing work using this new material.
There's a really great question. Do you have any upcoming opportunities for artists to get involved in Hanji Edition?
Ooh, if anyone's interested, I would highly encourage them to reach out to us. We have our website and our email and our Instagram posted on this one slide. Feel free to contact us if you have any interest. We'd love to talk to you.
That's great. All the information is right there. There are multiple questions about sizing. And if you are sizing the paper before sending it to artists.
We are not sizing the paper, and in general, Hanji is not, well, when it's purchased at the mill, it's not sized. I know that you can purchase it sized. I don't know if you can purchase it sized directly from the mill, or if it goes through somewhere else that does the sizing externally. But from as far as I can recall, I don't think any of the artists that we've worked with have sized the paper before printing on it or working with it. There definitely have been questions. I remember Yunmi Nam talked about, she works a lot with mokuhanga, and in her Hanji observations that she shared with us, she talked about having worked a lot with Japanese papers and kind of the difference between the two, and talked about wanting to potentially explore sizing Hanji first before, because she works with water-based inks. But the short answer is no, we don't size the paper before we send it out.
I'm going to read a long comment from Mina Takahashi, who is probably known to many here. Beautiful presentation and beautiful work. Thank you both. I was so happy to be able to see in person at the 2021 Hanji collection at School Museum of Fine Arts Tufts. As the editor of Hand Papermaking magazine, I realize how important good photography is in communicating the feel, the texture, the weight, etc. of the works. Nothing, of course, takes the place of handling the works, but would you please talk about what you think about when you document the work in photography and in the unboxing videos? You did such a good job of capturing their nuanced materiality. Thank you, Mina.
Thank you, Mina. I took the unboxing video, and I think, in this day and age, and it's part of it was trying to convey the essence of the second portfolio, which, as you all saw, is very different from the first. It's in general, as a book artist as well, I'm sure sculptors maybe have the same issue. It's very hard to convey all of the details and the qualities of dimensional work, and with paper there's it's even harder. So I found in my practice and when I share work that videos make all the difference in being able to show how the piece moves and is held in the hand and handled. And I think I think that does a lot more than still photos. But Lars, do you have anything to add about documentation?
No, I think said actually captures it really beautifully. I think we're experimenting with producing more reels. Like, we've posted a series of reels on Hanji on our Instagram to help people get a better kinetic sense of the movement of forming a sheet of paper, kind of the physical labor involved with raising the plant itself, the plant material itself. And we want folks to get a nice sense of the entire process from start to finish. And when it comes to documenting our work, I think we're working on that. I don't know if Steph and I have like a strategic marketing plan per se, or a photographer that we work with, but that's definitely something that we're still working on. And like many startups, we're making it up as we go along. So we're learning from our mistakes, and we're hoping to improve with every iteration of each project.
Are you planning any workshops available to the public? Are there studios where artists can learn and create Hanji in the US or abroad?
I can answer that question. I think I mean, I teach workshops. I teach Hanji workshops. I'm in Sacramento now, and I have I'm starting or in the middle of building a backyard studio with the hopes of teaching more people paper making, and that's where I was teaching that series of workshops that I talked about, which I did earlier this summer with the Korean diaspora. I know also, I mean, I can tell you now, Amy Lee also has a Hanji studio in Cleveland, and then Bobby Cho Henderson, who I mentioned earlier, is another Hanji practitioner who also teaches Hanji. I don't know of anyone else who teaches Hanji in the United States, but I know that all three of us are pretty active in teaching Hanji in our own studio spaces, and also traveling to different craft centers and things like that. And Lars and I have talked about, like, have dreamed of, offering workshops and printing or woodblock burnishing or paper making. And it's kind of part of this whole idea of community building and accessibility, and how important that piece is to making this work not just for certain people who can afford it, or people with very niche interests, or I think it's something that we think about in book arts in general, just kind of like, who is this for, and who is our audience, and how do we want these things to be presented and live in the world and experienced. And so I think workshops is a potential part of that. And then there's always the question of funding, and just an ongoing cycle. But Lars, do you have anything to add?
I would love to see more Hanji-based workshops. And I think for the Hanji practitioners that we know about in North America or in the West in general, it's almost a matter of it's almost like a matter of juggling time and resources, because many of us wear many hats. So we don't just do Hanji, we also have other jobs, we teach, we have our own personal practice. So it's something that we've talked about in community with other Hanji or print-based artists, is how do we balance that juggling act? And that's one of the things that we're talking about and trying to figure out as we have these big, lofty dreams for continuing and growing. So we actually welcome your feedback. If you have any thoughts or ideas, or want to talk about this with us, we would, again, love to hear from you. And we're happy to share more about our experiences as well, if that would be useful to anyone who's present.
That's such a generous offer. We're nearing the end. I love this question. Sometimes we think of traditions monolithically, but are there interesting, varied, and different kinds of Hanji practice historically which challenged that or just surprised you?
Yes. That is a really good question, because it's true that when I was in Korea, I visited a lot of different Hanji mills and worked with several practitioners. It is kind of like a funny cast of characters. Like they're not all necessarily aligned or approaching it the same way. But then it needs to get really distilled down when it's presented then to our audience here. So yes, I appreciate that question a lot. I mean, the person who came to mind immediately was this Buddhist nun named Yeongdam Sunim, who I worked with for a week in Korea, and she was a really funny person who, I think there's when you think of I was studying papermaking and spirituality, and so I definitely wanted to study with her, and she had a temple, but she was just not your typical monk, and she just had a very very, very different, very lively approach to papermaking, and she was really hustling. She was a paper maker but also a paper artist, and she started a museum, and it was very much a businesswoman. And so anyway, I just appreciate the question, because I think there are a lot of colorful characters and different motivations for why it's important to different people. And I think that also speaks to kind of a different and larger question about how these craft traditions are approached and seen in Korea versus in the diaspora. And I think it's different. And I think that's another interesting question as well.
We have a couple questions about your research. We also only have a few minutes. But there's a question about the scholarship of where the scholarship of Korean movable type in the West is headed. And there's also more interest to hear about your Fulbright research. Maybe we can start with movable type.
Yeah, Lars, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Thank you for asking about that. I feel like this is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart, and very few people know about it. So thank you for your interest. I think it's generally moving in the right direction, but it's moving very slowly. There is such little literature that's published in English on movable type that comes from Asia. And there's a wealth of it that's published in East Asia. And so for me, in my own research journey, I found that I've had to very, very slowly translate text from Korean and sometimes even from Chinese. And it's difficult as a second generation Korean American who's not fluent in either. So the scholarship is slow, but I think that there's growing interest. And one of the new projects I'm involved with that was mentioned at the beginning of the talk is trying to address the fact that the history of printing and the history of the world, if you zoom out and look at the larger picture, is quite a diverse history. There are many different cultures have contributed to early type and early printing. And so if you follow that project, which is called From Jikji to Gutenberg, I think you'll start to see some of the research and scholarship that's moving us in that direction.
Steph, do you want to talk briefly about your Fulbright research project?
I'll be very brief.
And then we'll let everyone go.
Actually, what I'll say is I'll just point everyone to I kept a journal. I think it's stephrewjournal.wordpress.com. And if that's not correct, then just maybe Google Steph Frew. It's called Field Notes. I kept field notes while I was on the Fulbright, and at the time it felt like a drag to keep up with the blog, but now I'm so grateful to my previous self for keeping that, because it sort of documented my Fulbright journey. So if folks are interested, there are also some like pretty decent tutorials on how to do some bookbinding things that I was learning while I was there. So I think that would be a good place to learn more about the Fulbright research.
Thank you. That is an amazing resource. So I want to extend a very warm thank you to everyone who joined us. We so appreciate your time and attention. And I also want to thank our amazing artist panelists, Steph and Lars Kim. Thank you for joining us and sharing your work with us. We really appreciate it. I hope everyone has a great day. I am going to end the webinar now.